Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today. Hello everyone, my name is Peter Pascucci and I'm here with Oren Soffer, and this week we are truly excited to welcome cinematographer Todd Banhazl of the ASC. Todd is known for his exceptional work in narrative features and TV, including Hustlers, starring Jennifer Lopez and directed by Lorene Scafaria, as well as the HBO show Winning Time, now in its second season. Todd's achievements include receiving an Independent Spirit Award nomination for Hustlers and a Primetime Emmy and ASC Award nomination for Winning Time. We're very hyped and deeply honored to welcome Todd to our show. So hello and welcome, Todd.
Hi, guys.
Hey, so yes, thank you so much for coming on. This is extremely exciting for us to have you. And yeah, in our usual fashion, we're just excited to dive in and get right into some questions. So I wanted to start by asking you something that, I think this is an interesting question just for any cinematographer or artist, but it's this idea of like a specific moment that you could maybe point to on your journey when you felt like you knew your direction and your alignment as a cinematographer. And yeah, we'd love to hear about the defining moment when you felt that accomplishment and that confirmation that you were kind of on the path of where you wanted to go as a cinematographer.
I think I've strangely always felt like I was on the path, that sort of like blind, just trust and belief that I was doing what I wanted to do that was going to make me really happy was kind of always there, and it was my fuel. I don't know. I mean, I think when Hustlers came out and did well, it was like the first movie I'd been a part of after so many indie movies that came out and did well, but like this was like a cultural moment. People I didn't know were seeing da-da-da. And like, I remember realizing, in some ways, this is like I've achieved my childhood dream in this weird way. Like I got to make when I was a kid, what I thought of as like a real movie, and making it was beautiful. And when it came out, it was beautiful. I don't know. So I remember thinking, now that I've reached my childhood dream, like what next? And then I guess what comes next is you just better be happy making the work, because the success part is kind of ephemeral and it lasts for like a second. It's candy and then it goes away. Because then pretty soon no one was texting and no one was seeing the movie anymore, and it was just like you're back to your life, So I don't know. That was like a moment of like reanalyzing the reason to do this thing, and then it just goes back to the deeper reason, which is to work with people you care about and believe in.
Yeah, that's so funny. I find myself thinking about that scene in Soul, movie Soul, where he finally like achieves his dream that he's been trying to pursue his whole life, playing the jazz quartet, and like he does it, he achieves it, and then he walks out and he's like asking the jazz singer, the woman that brought him onto the quartet and everything. He's like, what now? What do I do? I feel weird. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
And then she's like, you just do it again tomorrow. I mean, it's just hilarious that that's like in a Pixar like family movie.
Yeah.
That theme, but it's something I've thought about since that movie. Is sort of like, what do you do with that? And how do you kind of carry forward with it? And I guess you just kind of look for the next thing, right? You look for the next project that'll satisfy you, and I don't know, just keep the ball going.
I think we train ourselves as filmmakers, especially like in the first 15 to 20 years when you're just hustling and you train yourself to be like, I'm not even asking myself, is this the right project? I'm just like, yes, the phone rang. I'm going to shoot this thing. I'm going to make it the best thing possible.
Totally.
And you get used to that momentum. So it's a weird thing to like try to retrain yourself and shift to like a more like privileged place of like, what do I actually want to do?
Right. So how do you maintain artistic and creative integrity and control like throughout that whole spectrum? Because obviously in indie films and music videos, which I know you've done a lot of as well, that's such a great place to kind of flex that muscle and sort of find those visual interests. And they're very auteur-driven mediums, or in music videos, like at least just very experimental and very visual-driven places where you can kind of explore those interests and all that. But then as you kind of move up into bigger budget films, and you did Hustlers, and then an even bigger budget project, Winning Time, with all the sort of pressures and stakes that are involved in that, do you feel like along with that sort of ascension, there's also an abandonment a little bit of that control over your vision and your taste, or have you found a way to kind of maintain that throughout the different budget levels?
I have found we just don't ask for permission.
Yeah.
I actually have found that it has not changed.
Yeah.
Because we just bring the rebel attitude that we always had. I come from like scrappy filmmaking, we all do, but like it's in our blood, right? Like carrying the gear up and down into your own apartment at night for the movie you're making, and you finish shooting 14 hours and then you carry all those cases back into your house because you can't leave them in your car because they'll get broken into because you live in an apartment in a place where things get broken into. And it's like, I find that we just pretend that no one's looking.
Yeah.
And I just do what feels right and I know is right for the project. And I don't really think of it like taking risks. I just think of it like out of respect for the project, this is what needs to happen.
Is there also an aspect of seeking out filmmakers who create that permission structure, like that create an environment, a working environment where you can take risks or not take risks, but just do things without asking permission and answer the questions later? Like, are you looking for filmmakers that do that? Are you able to look for filmmakers that do that?
Yes, that's all I'm looking for is filmmakers who not only have like a courage or like a rebel attitude, but just believe in the thing they want to do so deeply that there's no other way. And once you have, I think when you have a director who has that attitude, then you can pull off miracles. That's actually how you get it done. I mean, I think like Winning Time's a great example. The reason we're able to take so many risks is because McKay and I took those risks in the pilot and he believed in them. So once we did that, then it became like a normal TV show in some ways, but we had already baked in the choices, you know?
Yeah. And it creates the permission structure. And then the people at the top who maybe have questions about it are like, well, we hired McKay, right? Like for a reason. And, he has a certain level of clout and we have a certain level of trust.
Yeah.
Because, Oscar winning filmmaker. Yeah. The aspect ratio thing is so funny because I remember there was, I can't remember what show it was, but there was something that HBO doesn't do, Letterboxd. Like they don't do 239.
Correct.
And all these other streamers have been doing 239 and somebody had a show and they really wanted to do 239 and HBO were just like, no, the market research, it's the people to turn off their TV when they see the Letterboxd.
So our episode of Winning Time that came out last night is that there's these Larry Bird flashbacks. That is the episode I directed that my friend Rick Diaz DP'd.
Yeah.
And it's Letterboxd. It's 16 millimeter anamorphic we shot. And I think the final aspect ratio on those scenes is like 2:5:5.
Yes,
maybe?
fantastic. Yeah,
maybe
you didn't crop the
2:4:5.
sides. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it, you know? And man, the amount of meetings and emails and permissions that had to happen, it's a miracle. I actually like applaud HBO.
I can't believe you pulled that off. Yeah.
Well, I think we maybe won enough trust in 3 years.
Right.
But it came down to like, there's a certain amount of the episode that can look like this and da-da-da. But I actually say this out of like total respect and complimenting all of the people at HBO who supported that.
Yeah, they went for it.
You're breaking the mold.
Right,
you know?
right.
I guess the last thing I'll add to that is like when we are taking risks or doing things that are untraditional, the way that I try to move them through the system is by doing extensive testing and by communicating it. I don't try to make it sneaky. I try to like show everyone and try to get everyone excited about what we're doing, so that everyone feels like they're part of the thing that we're doing is special, as opposed to like, oh, these maniac director and DP are going rogue, you know?
Yeah. So that's a good point, only because I feel like there can be an instinct to ask forgiveness, not permission, especially when it comes to this kind of thing. So it's actually good to hear that, maybe there's another way. And it's just about bringing people in as collaborators and getting them in on the idea and excited about the idea. So it's cool. And it's cool that it works. It's cool to hear that it works.
One thing that I love is that like these choices, and to give listeners some more context to some of these bolder choices, like in the case of Hustlers, using different resolutions and, different sizes of the sensor to achieve different qualities for talent. And then in the case of Winning Time, mixing tons of different film formats. And they definitely are like really bold choices. But what I love about it is that they come from a place of like total intentionality, it seems. And like the way that you articulate your technique and the craft of it all, it always ties back to trying to do something for the story or trying to do something for the project like you were just talking about. So I'd love to hear, a little bit about that intentionality and where you kind of arrived at that, because I think it's really unique and it really shows in your work how that stuff really carries all the way through and affects sort of the viewer's reaction to the piece.
I was always influenced by filmmakers who took risks and who used the form as part of the storytelling and thematic part of the filmmaking. So I don't know. These are just the choices that make sense to me. I think about Winning Time and actually like there's so much conversation I think in the DP community about lenses, but actually for me, I've sort of like changed. Lenses to me aren't as important as the acquisition format has become more the canvas that I'm thinking about, whether it's digital or film. Like the way the image looks, that can evoke as much feeling and as much like of the visual design as the lenses. And Winning Time actually has we use Shoot Primos.
Right.
Like they're just like
it's
really clean.
Basic lens, yeah.
Just they do the work. They have good contrast. They don't flare when you don't want them to. Like they hold faces beautifully, their field of view. And so...
Yeah. And in the case of Hustlers, like I wanted to hear a little bit about kind of your experience working on the Panavision digital camera and just sort of your relationship with Panavision in general over the years. It seems like you have a really close relationship with them. And yeah, I'd kind of love to hear what that's been like and those choices.
Well, Panavision has just taken care of me forever. I mean, Panavision, we were doing, The Strange Ones was a movie we shot for like $500,000 in upstate New York. It was like a passion project. All of us like lived in the same motel we were shooting in, and I remember going to Panavision, New York to Marnie Zimmerman and just being like, we will take whatever anamorphics you have. I don't care about the camera body. Like, give us a Arri X, give us a Alexa XT that no one's touching anymore, the big fat guy. And I was like, knowing that we're going to be shooting a tiny movie with tiny crew, but like, this is what it is. We're going to shoot this huge camera because that's what we can get for the money. And I think we got like Technovision anamorphics and then like one old Panavision anamorphic zoom and then like an ingenue, like half of it wasn't even anamorphic, but just like, thank you guys, we'll take what you have, And so they've just always been so supportive. And then that's just translated to the bigger projects. I mean, the way Hustlers happened is we were just testing every camera. Like the director and I, Lorene, thought we wanted to shoot on film and we couldn't afford that. So then after we got over being pissed, then we started testing digital and then started really leaned into like realizing, like large format can be really exciting for this movie. And I don't really... It's rare that a project, for me, I feel like large format is what I go to in terms of like thinking about what inspires me. But Hustlers, it just became so obvious. Like, oh my God, like it's a superhero gangster movie without them being superheroes or like they are gangsters. Like, let's shoot them. We called it like the 50-foot woman effect. And like, oh my God, we tested the Alexa 65 and it was like, look at them, like look at these dancers on this format, But then we realized we couldn't detune the Alexa 65. Like you couldn't make it not feel like the most epic thing you've ever seen. And half of Hustlers doesn't want to be that. Half of Hustlers wants to be this like 70s, like long lens, pressure, compressed thing. So that's when we realized that the DXL2 could change resolutions and therefore change the way a face feels. Then that became the canvas and the paintbrush. That was the only reason to use that camera for me. The rest is they're just like, they were image capturing boxes. We were going to put a LUT on it. It didn't really matter.
Yeah, that's super cool. Todd, you have an ability to discuss your work with such a great blend of technical insight and also artistic sensibility and like really explain the reasons that you choose certain tools and even like just how you were explaining the choice of camera for Hustlers just now and like what those different resolutions like allowed you to create and how it allowed you to capture the characters. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, is that something you think about, like how to communicate these ideas, how to kind of educate people about these choices and how to sort of explain that nexus of the creative choice and the technical choices that back up the creative choices? Like, I don't know, for me, sometimes I find it hard to explain those things. I don't know, it just feels right. But I don't know, you have this way of thinking about it that's really just inspiring. And it's really great for other people to learn from, I think, because it's just communicated very clearly. I don't know if you've ever thought about this.
I haven't. No, I really haven't thought about it. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's something everybody's, I think it's something that's quite noticeable in like your social media presence and just the stuff that you share and also just articles and interviews, like when you talk about your work. It's just something you're able to articulate very well.
I don't know. It's just the way I think about things, you know? I don't know. I think the tech never was my way in. The tech never interested me. What interested me was like the feeling and the ideas. And I don't know, my inspirations come from like, I also think I listen to a lot of experimental music and I think I pull a lot of inspiration from music. And I think about like, again, where the form is the function, the form is the message, and I think about like there's this John Cage piece. I think it's called like 3:33, whatever it is. It's the time length of the song. And the instructions for how to play this piece of music are the piano keys are never to be pressed. So basically it's silence. It's like 3.5 minutes of silence.
Yeah.
But that to me is like so beautiful. And it's like, I'm so inspired by like Brian Eno, for example, where like the music is actually like, it's the idea of like setting up 2 tape recorders and letting them go and seeing what happens. Like so something about like the form being the message has just always inspired me. So I don't know. In terms of my ability to communicate it, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. I do think, to your point, I think it's so valuable to talk about it with the community because that's how we get inspiration from each other. Because I know, like, also anything I'm doing came from inspiration from another film that I've seen, period. Like, and I think about reading, like, oh my God, who's the deep? Darius Kanji, that book, that yellow book. Do you know what I'm talking about? The yellow book?
Yeah. The one that's out of print that you can't get anymore.
the Yellow and Purple book. Oh my God, like so inspiring. So I just know what it's like I think it's beautiful to share.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess on the topic of education, which is kind of like a big thing with what we're trying to do with the show and the salon in general, can you think of a person or an entity or something that really helped you kind of gain the confidence or develop your craft further that you can point to? Or on the flip side of that, do you find yourself at this stage, with all the amazing work that you're doing and the projects that you're a part of, trying to pass that on or having like a mentee or anything like that you take part in?
Yeah, it's very important for me to try to give back and to be a motivation or inspiration for anyone that asks. I don't know. I still feel like I'm this really excited kid who loves filmmaking and wants to be part of this thing. So it blows my mind if like someone on Instagram, like a student reaches out and says they're inspired and they have questions. I'm like, this is a crazy like matrix breaking moment, because you like blink and I have like no hair on my head and I'm getting, it's like a weird. So yeah, I don't know. It fills my heart up. Yeah, it's really important.
It's awesome. Yeah, that imposter syndrome type of thing is so real. I mean, one thing that we've tackled a few times on the show, but we'd be really interested to hear your journey too with representation and sort of how you arrived at working with artistry and what kind of factors and roles played into the decision to join with them and how that collaboration has been going.
Yeah, I know this question comes up a lot and I think it's a funny one. I'd be curious your experience as well, Oren. Like for me, I always felt like what I learned eventually about representation is that when you are ready to have the right agent, they will come to you. And like for all the years of like trying to figure it out and meeting with places, and then I was with a place that kind of sucked and they didn't take care of me. I mean, what happened for me is I'll try to make this story quick, but like I had no representation. I was a young punk and I was working with a producer who she was doing a couch commercial, and that DP on that couch commercial got sick. So they needed a replacement. So I filled in last minute, and then that DP's agent wanted to know who had replaced their guy. And then they was me, and then they reached out to me and they brought me on. And then they did nothing for me for a year and they were awful. And I was like being in a bad relationship where you're like, it's like gaslighting. I was like, am I crazy? Like, I feel like an agent should respond to my emails or like book me one job at least this year, but maybe I just don't deserve it. It's like all this shit.
Yeah.
And then I came to realize like, oh no, they just suck. And so what happened was after about a year of that, a producer who I owe so much of my career to, Kimberly Stuckwich, who works a lot with artistry, and Greg D'Alessandro at Artistry, had mentioned to him, hey, Todd's not happy at his agency. He's going to leave. If you want him, now's the time to scoop him up. And I assume Greg had been paying attention to me and as I think a lot of agents do, they're watching the younger people and waiting as their kind of careers build towards they have like a little more momentum. Because I mean, they're also, agencies are trying to, they have different tiers, right? They have like their beasts at the top, the moneymakers, and they have their like all the middle range, they have car guys, da-da-da. And then they have the young up and comers who they're like building those careers and putting them on the music videos, trying to get them with hip directors and build that. So Greg took me on and that was the beginning of it. And then my experience has been that artistry is like what you want out of an agency, at least what I wanted. They are like truly my partners and truly understand what I'm trying to do and are truly there for me, like philosophically, emotionally. We're building something together. So I don't know. What was it like for you?
Yeah. No, it's fantastic to hear that because I don't know. I've definitely sort of exchanged hands fairly frequently, but I'm very happy where I am now at UTA and I feel very similarly as you do. But yeah, we get this question a lot about representation. I think it's just something that a lot of people think about possibly too early. I certainly did. I was definitely like asking around about representation like way too early and way before I had any work that could back that up.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to say that like, you just don't need to worry about it, actually.
That's what I want to say too. Like you actually don't.
Yeah, you just should make great stuff. And like, it just happens naturally. It just, over time, you make cool stuff and then people know other people and they connect you with a person and then you get repped and it's good or bad, but then you move on,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is, it's sort of like you said, like at the end of the day, all the agencies are keeping tabs on people. Like they're keeping tabs on the DPs that are doing interesting things that are at the start of their career. So it's like if you do interesting things and if you do notable things, they'll notice. And then if the timing's right, someone will reach out. And that's not to say that if you know somebody, like if you have a good friend who's at an agency and you feel like the time is right and you feel like your work is at that place that you can ask for an intro or from a producer friend or whatever it is, like, but I think you end up knowing when the time is right, like really. And it's not something that people should worry about as nearly as much as they do.
I agree. I mean, I think also one thing that will happen is like you finally get a project that's like slightly bigger or like a movie that, and you're like, oh, I need someone to negotiate this for me. And that's a great time to go speak to an agency and be like, hey, even if you don't rep me, will you negotiate this movie? And then you start building that relationship.
Totally. It's a great excuse to start a relationship. And yeah.
But
absolutely.
even that, I feel like I also think we're always trying to like outsmart the system and say like, well, maybe if I just shoot, I need the car stuff in my reel, or I need like beauty stuff in my reel. I need to look more well-rounded. But honestly, I feel like there's so many DPs now. It's a very different world than like when we were young.
Yes.
Now everyone's kind of a DP and everyone's work can look really good because the cameras all look really good. So I assume what agents are looking for, or what directors are looking for, is a unique voice. So actually, I feel like all we should worry about is just making work that we believe in, that feels the most personal possible, and that will get you there. I don't know if that sounds like a platitude, but...
No, I couldn't agree more. I feel like I end up coming back to that exact same thing. It's like, how do you stand out in this day and age when everyone's a DP? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it's a good way. Like, I think that the democratization of filmmaking like is very much real and is very much good and positive. And I don't think anyone should ever feel like guilty for calling themselves a DP, or anyone who's like making TikTok videos isn't a filmmaker or anything. Like, I don't subscribe to any of that. But on the flip side is also like, okay, well, there's a lot more competition out there. So if you want to rise to the top, if you have that ambition, like, what makes you stand out? It's that. It's like finding your unique voice and like what makes your work yours, and what makes your artistic expression like reflect your own personal taste and interests. And like, that's what makes you stand out ultimately.
Yeah, you put your heart into it, even if it's a project that doesn't kind of need your heart. I mean, I think about this with commercials, like to your question earlier about like asking permission. Like,
right.
I still do this in commercials, and I definitely did it back then. Like, I know they want it to be more poppy or bright or safe. We just don't do it until they ask.
Yeah.
Because they also want the other thing. They want it to be like higher taste level, like edgy. They want it to be beautiful. They just don't know how to get it, and they're scared. So like, you just make something that you believe in. And then again, if they're not okay with it, they'll come to the monitor and say like, make it brighter, and then you can do the thing, you know? But like...
Yeah, that note of like, make it brighter is so interesting, because I feel like I've been thinking about that so much lately, because I'm like, I feel like what everyone's looking for is like shaped light. Like, it's not like brighter or darker. That's so reductive, you know? It's like, you can, a client who likes the brightest things in the world could find something super beautiful and perfect for their brand if it's not necessarily bright, but just like shaped and tasteful. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So if you skip that and just make it bright because you assume, then you've shortchanged it already. You know, I think you're so right. It's often where the light comes from. It's like we think of commercial poppy safe as bright, but you're so right. It has nothing to do with luminance. It's everything to do with like where the key, whatever you're doing, you know.
And it's contrast, and it's just like dynamic range with an image. Yeah, all that. I always think about this Mel Brooks anecdote where he was talking about the studio notes that he used to get on like the producers and Blazing Saddles and stuff like that. And he would say like, yeah, I would get a note from the studio like, this scene can't be about farts. Like, we can't just have this whole scene about farting. And then he would just respond like, yeah, you're right. It's out of the movie. I'm going to cut it. And then he just doesn't do it. and he just, every time they have a note, he'll just like, yep, yeah, you're absolutely right on it. It's gone. And then like 6 weeks or months later, like, he just doesn't take it out of the movie, and then they watch a cut.
And then, it's good.
And then they're like, it's good. It works. Yeah, exactly.
But I think about this a lot too. Like, I really do think that our producers and our EPs and our financiers and our agencies and clients, they're not the enemy at all. They are excited people who believe in the thing they're making and they want something great. So it's about building a bridge to give them something great so that you guys can meet in the middle. And sometimes it's about like helping them get there. I really do believe that. And I think like both sides are coming from bad previous relationships. DPs and directors are coming from stuff where they got burned. Agencies and clients are coming from stuff when they get burned. When you get a note where like, we don't do anamorphic, or VFX says no anamorphic, or whatever it is, because one time they did this commercial where someone did it incorrectly and then they had to spend all this money to fix it. And you're like, let's stop, talk about the concerns, you know. So I don't know, it's about new relationships, and I really do, they're not the enemy.
Such a great point. I mean, everything you said about permission versus, trying to sneak it is so huge in that environment especially. And I love that whether it's a narrative project or a commercial, you're always thinking about just showing all your cards, because it's like, what is the point of hiding things like in the work that we do? It's just, creates problems. I mean, back on the topic of representation, I think everything you said is so accurate. And I think like I was reflecting on my experience of getting a rep, and like I was thinking about the fact that it was like a peel apart expired Polaroid film photo that I posted on my Instagram story that had nothing to do with my work, that the agent like DM'd me about. And it's so funny how like you can chase like spec work and you can chase like the things that you think you need to get representation, and then they'll notice you for something completely unexpected. Yeah. And that is where it clicks. And like, I even remember the meeting was, I brought like a film camera and we were just talking about that the whole time. And I was like, this is not what I necessarily thought it would be. But it's interesting because I also get why people have that feeling of like, I need representation, I need to seek it out, because I think our industry is so volatile and it's so mysterious, like how one creates a sustainable career in our world of freelance cinematography. And like, so I think for all of us probably, and for a lot of other people, it's just like, that's the only thing we can really point to for like structure and to like bring in work is like, oh, this person will do that for me, which is like maybe sort of a fallacy, but it's like, yeah, I get why people think that's the way to do it. And it's interesting to hear both of you say that like you still sort of shouldn't seek it out. Like it should happen naturally, which I think is also so true. And it's like even sometimes in my case, like after having an agent for a while, it didn't feel like I needed it until a point. And then you kind of grow into it and then you're like, oh, this is totally necessary. Like I can't do this alone. And yeah, it's just a process.
And you think that the agent is going to bring you scripts that you're not getting, but they're not. Because if you don't have the movies, then a director's not going to want, so you have those early movies you have to do with the people you know and make special stuff. And then that's what gets you noticed. It's not going to come from an agency.
Right. And Hustlers and Winning Time both were from like pre-existing relationships, right? Or it was through recommendations. There was like...
Yeah, Hustlers came, they're related. Hustlers came through... The director, Lorene, was interviewing her costume designer, Mitchell Travers, who I had worked on The Strange Ones with a million years ago. And he comes from like bigger movies. And he had done this smaller movie because he loved the script. And we really connected on that movie. And in his interview for Hustlers, he said, you should check out this guy, Todd. And I think she was looking for a DP and she had seen like these Janelle Monáe music videos I had done. And then we met. And then I had never done a movie of that size. And she had to really push for me, and I had to go through multiple rounds of interviews with 2 different financier companies because it was with Annapurna, and I had to interview with them, and then it got dropped there, and it was somewhere else I had to interview with. So it's like everyone needs someone to advocate for you, and like I needed Lorene, my director, to advocate for me, and she was just like, "This is my guy, period." And so I got through the door that way, and then that movie was EP'd by McKay and his company. So it's like that's how these things. Now that's not to say the Janelle Monáe videos came from my agent.
Right.
So
yeah.
It's an ecosystem, you know what I mean?
Totally.
It's everything.
But I think also it's people, I mean, I can certainly speak for myself, but like getting an agent feels like the first sort of step of like validation on the journey to I'm a legitimate
I exist.
Professional, like cinematographer. I exist. Exactly. So I completely, totally understand where the impetus comes from that people
totally.
fixate on it. Like I totally get it.
Yeah.
So talking about validation, you recently joined the ASC. which I think is also one of those things that every little baby DP dreams of and certainly thinks about or muses about when reading American Cinematographer as in high school or whenever. But it really is a testament to your work and how far you've come so far and the things you've been able to achieve, and must have been like a pretty incredible honor. So can you talk about first off what it was like getting the call or email, or I don't know how one finds out, but also what the impact of being a part of the ASC has done for your career. And then also sort of looping back to the education question, we'd be curious to hear how you envision your role within the ASC community, contributing to both your growth as a cinematographer and to the broader cinematography field, considering that it's an organization that also has a very focused education aspect to it.
Yeah, they really do. The whole experience has been a surreal... like a matrix, like feeling like you can see the code behind the matrix, like it doesn't make any sense, Yeah. I've been to like the ASC dinner or whatever. You've been to these things and you look around, you're like, oh, there's like whoever eating dinner, and you're like, that human is the reason I'm a filmmaker, like really, like truly deeply, like I have lived and bled and, I've done these small movies on my hands and knees with ideas that came from that filmmaker's work, and you're like, they're just, getting more chicken from the buffet.
Yeah, they're just sitting there, just like totally unassuming.
Yeah, they're just people.
Slightly socially awkward, like all of us. And, like they're all, right, exactly. They're just people.
So for me, the ASC, I guess the experience has been like really humbling and beautiful because I just feel the community. And I realize that all of these DPs, these giants, these legends, they're just like us. They just love what they do. And they love working with good directors. And that's so beautiful to me, and they still feel like they're learning and growing, To your other question, the community and the giving back, the outreach has become even more important to me through the ASC and just through my own life. I don't know. I just really think about the generation under me now, which is crazy because I don't know when that happened.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
I mean, hearing you talk about those dinners and those environments where you're among those giants and stuff, one question that I'm always curious about is like, and I ask it to you, and then maybe curious how you see it to the people that you look up to. But what do you think they're tapping into, like, to create the work that inspired you in such a significant way that put you on the literal path of what you're doing with your life now? Like, what do you think allowed them to do that? You know, sometimes I think it can be as simple as the things you've already mentioned, like sort of aligning yourself with the right directors, or, you know, having that like punk mentality and just carrying that through even to the biggest budgets. Like, what is kind of that nugget that you see in their work?
I mean, it's probably personal to each one of these filmmakers, but what I see in them that unifies them for me, that's inspiring, is like, it's what you're saying. It's that punk rock. Greg Fraser's a great example, who you know, obviously. Like, regardless of the budget, his voice is there. And also his, like, you can tell the filmmaker is taking care of that director's vision to the just bitter ends of where that vision can go. And you feel that. You feel that with Matthew Libatique, like every single project, and they look so different, but you feel like you can tell that the DP is fighting for the director.
Yeah.
So
Kanji
for sure.
My God.
You know?
I mean, what a varied career. Like,
but bold and
always bold.
Richardson. Like, there's no winning time without Richardson for me, and Oliver
Totally
Stone. Like,
right. Yep.
Everything we're doing on that show comes from what I fell in love with in Natural Born Killers and JFK, and like seeing like, what, you can cut to a different look in the middle of a scene because it feels right, and you're playing on American culture's perception of what things feel like in other movies, and you can use the textures of other movies to like harken back to your emotional feeling in a scene, like all this stuff. Like, I saw it somewhere else and it inspired me, and then we riffed on it in our own way. So
I love that. I love hearing you talk about music too and how you're inspired by that, because I think like for people on the outside, sometimes we think it's like technique or it's craft or it's like, you know, decades of technical experience that give people these voices, like the voice of Greg Fraser, the voice of these other amazing cinematographers that you're talking about. But I feel like at a certain point, it often just ends up being life experience and like your sensibilities as an artist. And maybe like, you know, I can see in Winning Time and everything, the influence of music is so palpable. Like, it's such a brilliant like marriage of cinema and music, and it's cool that you're bringing that stuff to your work, and you're putting your, you know, sort of signature on it in that way. And yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you. I mean, it's POV, isn't it? Right? I feel like that's what we see in the people that we look up to, and maybe that's what they have that makes them successful in a way, is they have a POV. Like, it matters. Like, do you put the camera below the eye line, you know, or how do you light a face, right? Like, for me, like, the thing I'm most proud of in Winning Time is how we light faces, and like the work that went into like working with the makeup department and the way we light the spaces, and then what we do to the film, so that those three things cocktail into like that shine, the kind of shine that's this like kind of gross, ugly, human, weird shine in Winning Time. That's how I see people. That's what I love about people. Like, I think that imperfection is beautiful and human. So like, even on like a big show, I think you're able to be so personal with how you see the world. And maybe that's what I want to see in other filmmakers. Yeah.
I mean, all that stuff is really resonant for me as well. And especially the idea of embracing imperfection, something I've been thinking about a lot recently. And I think that is a through line through a lot of the DPs that I admire and that I grew up admiring, is like, you see, it's not even about quote unquote breaking the rules, which is sometimes how it's described.
Yeah, it's about, it's not thinking about the rules.
It's not even thinking about it. Exactly. It's just embracing like the raw imperfection of reality and naturalism and realism. And if you're going to take it to a stylized level, it's like same thing. It's just ignoring it. It's just breaking it. It's just
there's stylized good and there's stylized bad, right? Like, look at like Christopher Doyle's work with Wong Kar-wai.
Exactly.
Like, oh my God, super stylized, but also incredibly messy and imperfect.
Imperfect, exactly. Or, you know, I always think about Harris Savides, and obviously Harris is like direct lineage from Owen Roizman and Nestor Almendros and all these other DPs who are also breaking the quote unquote rules in terms of lighting and in terms of like, how much do you see in a scene? How much do you not see? How much do you see in a face? And just leaning into and embracing like the rawness of reality. Like, just put fucking fluorescence in the scene and call it a day, and just let them be ugly. Like, let them be raw. And I love that stuff. And I think that is what makes interesting cinematography for me personally. And other people might like, you know, the super styled, super clean, like super well-placed units and nice backlights and stuff like that. Like, everyone's into their own thing. But I think, I don't know, finding that thing that interests you is what's important. And I think that using that as a driving mechanism, it's just your taste, really. It's all taste. It's taste with directors too, isn't it? Like, I feel like directors are ultimately tastemakers, like the good directors. That's what they do. They come into a project and they just have taste. And they're like, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and you're
I like
constantly
that
checking.
thing.
Every day is a culmination of all these yes or no decisions
Yeah.
that come down to taste.
Yeah.
And like checking in with your heart and your gut on something. And that's the muscle right. And that's probably what makes different directors, different DPs. Like that's the personality, right? Is just those yes or no. Which do you say yes to? Which do you say no to, you know?
Absolutely. Something you mentioned earlier was, and we've talked about this before, is this kind of like childlike wonder for cinematography and this sort of just love of the art form and the craft. Can you talk a little bit about like maintaining that? I mean, have you found any obstacles to that? Or is that something that you've always managed to tap into? And also, you've been dabbling in directing as well on Winning Time, and just sort of curious how that ties into the sort of love of the craft of cinematography, but then also this sort of broader love of filmmaking. Like, I don't know, maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah. Cinema is my church, and it will always be from when I was a kid. Going to the movies, like it's holy to me. And so that's the well that I reach into when I run out. But also the well that I reach into for inspiration is working with other people. And like more and more, the more I do this, it becomes less about making stuff that's like stuff that I love and more about creating a beautiful experience on set so that whatever that happens between us on set that is so beautiful shows up on screen. And I just believe there's a way to do that even in like TV and even on commercials and even on music videos.
Yeah.
When it's like the most ambition and the least money and the most stress, there's still a way to like remind people as the head of a department, remind people why they got into this thing and remind them of how incredible artists they are and bring that out of them and see that miracle happen on set. Like that to me, I believe shows up on screen. It happens with I guess to your question about directing, like the difference for me is that then you're doing that with actors as well. And like what I experienced on Winning Time directing was like, we were doing this in the cinematography, but even the analogy I was making is that as a cinematographer, I'm always trying to capture lightning in a bottle. But as a director, we are trying to create the weather conditions for lightning.
Right.
To then capture it.
Yeah.
Which is tricky, right? Because you're trying to, it's actually constructed, but you're trying to make it feel like it just happened, But that was so exciting to me of like, can we create scenarios where the actors can then surprise us themselves? And then we can create scenarios with the operators where we're also catching it. It's like everything is happening live, even though it's all planned to create that thing, So it just felt like a little more holistic directing in that way. But I think it also just taught me to just remember like, oh yeah, you're a filmmaker and it's okay to say that. It's okay to be as like a DP director. I'm a filmmaker,
right?
And I love this,
I love that because that, that also really resonates because that was a big philosophical guiding light for the creator as well. Was like creating. That's such a great analogy. Creating the weather conditions for lightning so that you can then capture it in a bottle.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
It's. I think it's also about like releasing control, right? Because you're like you have this overall vision for what the project needs to be. But can you be there on set and respect what happened on set and be like, cool, that's the thing that happened and that's the thing we're going to bottle. And can we put that into the larger vision that needs to happen for this project? It's scary because sometimes you see it like curving off the rails and you're like, is it curving off the rails good?
Right.
I didn't think of this idea, or is it curving off the rails bad because this is not going to then line up with the rest of it, And it's like that's the dance.
It is. It's really, really tricky because it's, right. You are ultimately artificially creating it. You're not making a documentary. You're
totally.
not.
It's all created.
Exactly. But it has to feel organic in order for it to feel imperfect.
And to feel therefore alive.
Yes, exactly.
And
so
some people disagree, right? Like a David Fincher movie would disagree with that. Like,
yeah.
But there's no right way,
No.
Yeah.
No.
What did you look to the most for stepping into the shoe of director? Like, was it cinematography? Did it feel like an extension of cinematography? Was it looking at directors and showrunners and people throughout your career? Like, what was the thing that you got quiet about and like before you stepped into that role and used as fuel to kind of be confident in that role?
I mean, first of all, it was so cool doing it because it was really cool to do something that I'm not as experienced in. It was amazing to be there on set and realize like, oh, like you don't have all the answers the way, like cinematography, I've done it enough now that like you're always discovering new things, but like you have your when problems come in, you're used to those problems and you kind of go, okay, God, that's happened before. Like I know how to solve that. Like okay, someone behind the clouds or someone's behind that building forever now, or like whatever, running out of time. You get used to being like, what do we actually need? Like you get used to problem solving. But with directing, I was like, oh, like I have a limited amount of vocabulary here and I know in my heart what needs to happen, but like, yeah, cut's about to get called. and all the notes I gave are not doing it yet. And it's time for me to give another note. And as a DP, you can kind of stand back sometimes and like have those thoughts quietly. But as the director, you're at the front there. So I think getting used to that was, it was cool. It was really exciting to be on the edge of my experience and feel that growth happening in like a much bigger way than normal, you know? The way I found confidence is first I was looking towards directors that I respect. And then I realized that's not going to work for me. And I think I realized the way to do this is just the way that I know how to be a person with people. And once I realized that, then it became easier. Then it just became what I was normally doing on set with my crew or my director, but now doing it with the actors, which is like helping them feel safe to do their best work.
I love it. We want to dive into talking a little bit more in detail about Winning Time, which is in its second season right now. So there's been a few episodes out and everyone should check it out because Todd and the team are doing like some really, really cool, bold things that nobody else is doing. And the show just like does not look like anything else, which I think is really cool.
Thanks, buddy.
Can we talk about... Can we talk about some of those techniques? Like you guys have been doing, I mean, this season, the shutter sync boxes stood out to me, which I texted you about because I was like, how the hell did you get that kind of streaky, the melty light look? And you've also been using, I think also in season 1, like image shakers and other tools to just like mess with the image, prisms to get the lenses close to the ground, like using doublers on 11:1 zooms, like all this stuff. What was the process like in both seasons to sort of find these things? Like, was there some tinkering? Where did you even get the idea to try some of this stuff out? Like some of these are like analog tools that probably have not been touched in many years. So like, what was it like, I guess, like discovering the tool set that you created to have at your disposal?
I like discovering tools or techniques during some other thing I'm shooting, and then I catalog it in my brain of like, oh, that could be really cool to apply to something where it has an emotional reason. So a lot of this comes from like commercials or like music videos or whatever. You're just like using tools because you need a special shot where there's some commercial on a board where the camera's like in the floor, low angle, and you're like, oh, how do we do that? We can't afford to cut the floor out like in Citizen Kane. So, oh, there's this device called low angle prism. And then you try it and you're like, wow, that's a crazy looking image. And you like mark it in your pocket. Okay, cool. One day I'm going to use that when it matters, you know? Same thing with the image shaker I had used on like a car commercial. And I was like, this is cool. And it reminded me of in Fight Club when Brad Pitt's looking at the camera and he's like, forget your khakis, forget your da-da-da.
Yeah.
And the film starts like, like
and you
wobbling.
start to see the edge of the film actually.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, like this is cool because it's like the theme or whatever's happening in the movie is so crazy right now that it's ripping the film off the sockets. And I was like, I will find a moment in a project that deserves the feeling that what's happening on screen is so intense or so emotional that it's pulling the film off the registration. So we found a moment in Winning Time, which is like when Kareem's ankle is injured and he's stepping on it, he's playing on an injured foot. Every time he steps on it, we're like, let's use the image shaker. And like, it's like the pain of that he's experiencing, then the image is experiencing. Again, that goes back to like skipping the lens in a way and going to like the format is experiencing what the actor's experiencing. So yeah, I don't know. The same thing with the blending, the melty shutter off sync. I think my AC David Edsel probably reminded me like that thing exists. I think we'd used it before when just syncing a television, but then realizing that when you use it in weird ways, it makes the light streak, and we'd been looking for a reason for it. And then there was this badass dunk that happens in episode 2, and we're like, when he dunks, all these lights should just melt, you know? And so then you build that into this to the set. You say, like, okay, well, then we know that this location, we need to line up lights above that are going to do that. And it's like the idea becomes part of the DNA, you know? And
right. And I'm assuming you're testing all of this.
Yeah, we always test, which is hard when you're in the middle of a project. We test beforehand. So you're always fighting for the test because I have to see it, especially with this kind of stuff, like the image shaker or the melting stuff. You test extensively so that you can be really risky on set because you know where the line is. There's some famous DP that said, take risks. But when you do, rate your light meter slightly lower.
Yeah, right.
And I love that. Because it's like, just test and know your shit so then you can just be bold. And you look like a rock star, but actually you know exactly what it's
what it's going to do.
You know where the lines are. I mean, it's the same thing with like there was a flashback in season 1 where we're going back to a character's experience, African-American character's experience with slavery. And I was rattling my brain on how to photograph this in a way that, because it's kind of written in a way where they're kind of like violent flashbacks. And I was like, oh my God, like I really don't want to do flashbacks where like this like slave owner and like we don't have enough time on screen to earn it emotionally. Yeah. So how do we not just make it like torture porn? The thought that we came up with was I'd been inspired by these photos by Richard Moss for years. He went to the Congo and he photographed child soldiers using aerochrome film. which was film designed by Kodak for the military so that they could photograph nature from above, from planes. And it turns green into pink so they could tell in the jungle whatever didn't turn pink was metal and was maybe like a tank or a piece of military equipment. Yeah. So he used that format to humanize these soldiers. He like took something meant for war and repurposed it. So I've been looking for a reason to use that format in a way that felt emotional. And we used it in a movie called Braid when a character's taking PCP. We used it, and that was maybe a little more fashion. But for this, it felt right of like, oh, let's take something that was created out of violence for scenes that are about violence and like use it for good. So we shot those scenes in Aerochrome. But that was in my back pocket for like 10 years waiting for a good use, you know?
Yeah. I remember those scenes in Braid. It's like such a distinct look. So that's cool. Just the lineage of that, like that, just to trace like, oh, I've used this for one scenario and now, oh, here's another scenario where like it has a different meaning. That's great. Can you explain also just for listeners what the image shaker is?
Yeah.
Some people might not.
Sure. So the image shaker is, the one that Keslow makes, and Panavision has one now that works differently, but the one that Keslow makes is like a pane of glass that goes in front of the lens, like a giant map box. And you're still focusing through the image. I don't think you're focusing to the glass like those old like Red Rock adapters. But what happens is the image, I suppose, projects onto that glass, and then it has several points of like motion and movement on it that you can control from this little box. So it starts like shaking, literally shaking up and down, left, right, and they have different modes, like earthquake mode. Like there's cheesy ones that look like Star Trek, like shaking ground, and then there's car ones where it's more like it looks like a small vibration. I'll use them like in car scenes when you want things to have like a little bit more vibration to help that realism. But on Winning Time, we just cranked everything to the maximum amount. And then you have like a little switch, like a little bomb device that you can press the red button and then it shakes the image. So we would just like shoot that, and either me or the operator would be controlling it, and you'd be like shooting and then time it with the actors. But that's what it does.
Yeah. That's so funny. Cut to me like shooting green screen car stuff, just like manually shaking the camera.
Yeah, it's the same idea. This just has like you can really get it to like jello and wobble. It starts to feel like the image is flying off the frame. It's like a really crazy.
Yeah. I feel like, watch the show, you'll see.
It's also cool because it's like having the control of the haptic feedback of knowing that you want to do that. Like some people might say, oh, do it in post, but
they did say do it in post.
Of course they did.
And we said no.
Yeah.
Out of respect, we said no, because it's not going to be, it'll never look the same. It'll never be timed. And you know what? We can do it once and they can replicate it later, but not from the ground up.
No, you have to, right. You need some analog reference at the very least, but also, like there's something when you're doing stuff like this where it's physically messing with the image. Yeah. It's like, it really should be analog. Like you should
it's
be
a
physically
different,
doing it. It's just
there's
different.
a reactivity. It's different.
Yeah. It's the same with shaking the camera. Like I've also done that, like shooting car driving stuff on green screen. And then some posts will say like, oh yeah, we can add the wobble.
It never looks as good.
It's like, it just doesn't look as good.
Ever.
It doesn't look as good.
And I try, it's like, I love my VFX supervisors. I love working with them like very, very intimately. But there are certain things I'd always rather just give them. And some of them are like that. Some are like, do it for real and we'll match it. I prefer that way of working,
Yeah. Well, this is a good segue because we wanted to talk about the VFX in the show as well a little bit. There's a lot of hidden VFX to fill out crowds and arena scenes, building out period accurate production design and all this stuff. But obviously the DNA of the show is so analog and so physical in front of the camera. So can you talk a little bit about that collaboration with the VFX soup and the VFX philosophy overall, and sort of the challenge of the artists like replicating the different formats that you shoot on, and also the different optical effects? Like what does that end up looking like?
Yeah, the big challenge has been trying to get the VFX to look not only documentary real, but also look the way they would have looked when you photographed them on these formats at the time. There's something where like, okay, for example, you shoot a scene with two characters on a balcony, and then in the background they're going to add 1980s LA skyline. The problem becomes when they add it in, there's too much detail in the skyline, because if you were shooting that skyline in the 80s with the film stocks that existed at 200 ASA, it would be mostly black and then little out of focus dots as opposed to the full city. So it's like communicating to the VFX teams that like, it's not just about realism. It's about, it has to match the way it would have been acquired at the time. And your LUT can take you so far, but it doesn't get all the way. And that's been the big challenge on Winning Time. And also it's like, there's taste stuff of like, Winning Time, everything is shiny. Everything is shiny. The paint swatches we use on the walls have shine in them. We build reflective surfaces into everything. We ask for the lights. We build in ceilings. We put lights so they're going to reflect in people's skin. Like reflectivity is such a big part of Winning Time. So to communicate to VFX that like, don't do matted surfaces, which you think is easy, but it's like they fall through the cracks when there's multiple effects houses and there's time constraints, and then you don't have time to give notes, and like things come back for approval and you're like, it's not there. And they're like, well, we're out of time. And it's like, okay, well.
Totally. And how much of it are you even approving as a DP?
On Winning Time, a lot of it, but I think that's rare.
Yeah, it is.
I think that's just because the look is so weird.
Right.
I don't know why it happened, but
yeah, they have to run it through.
But typically that is not the case.
Yeah.
But again, that's just communication. So we created, not only there's a Winning Time look Bible that's like over 100, 200 pages of like what the look is and why, texture, reflectivity, skin, walls, surfaces. There's also temperatures of lighting. It's like,
I mean, you have to get really granular.
You have to get really granular.
You have to get really, really specific.
And then we made one for basketball as well. It was like, it wasn't about the arenas just looking real. They had to look real the way you would photograph them in the 80s when cameras were auto-exposing to the very bright arena. It means that the crowd would go extra dark.
Yeah.
So we had to tell them like the crowd needs to go darker than you think because they would have been shot on cameras that couldn't handle the contrast. It's like, it's taste. I mean, the real challenge, the thing that blows my mind is I look at like a movie like Dune or Blade Runner 2049 or The Batman. I mean, a lot of these is Fraser's work, but like, and yours as well on the creator, like when images are completely VFX.
Yes.
But they still have that semblance of reality. The thing that blows my mind in Dune is like sometimes like you can barely see the ships because the dust.
Yes.
Or like in Blade Runner, there's those opening stuff of the cars flying through the city and like it's basically just blinking lights in complete haze.
Yes.
Like I assume that comes from like some of the best VFX supervisors in the world and also these directors with
it's the directors. It's the directors
saying like, exactly. It's like ultimately the DPs, I think like we're helping and we're fighting for these things, but it takes a director, the vision at the top to give those high level notes.
Exactly. And to give the permission. To say like, I don't want to see that. I want this to just be silhouettes and Yeah. And in Dune, it's very similar. I mean, they shot a ton of it. It's like these amazing sets that they built and all the location work. Like there's always a reference. There's always something that they're referencing.
Yeah.
So even when they're doing a fully CG shot, of which there are many in the film, but they're usually like all the big wide shots, they're referencing this footage that they've shot on location. So they're just replicating it on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
And the set extensions and all of that are just reacting to what's in the foreground. But then when you scale that up to a fully CG shot, it's like you're just doing the same thing. But you need to have the planning and the wherewithal and the vision from the production designer and the director and all that to like carry that through all the way. But it's interesting. And it's interesting to see how it's applied in a show like Winning Time, because you could probably tell somebody who isn't looking for it that there were no visual effects. And
hopefully. There's a lot of visual effects going into stuff that people wouldn't even think about. Like, those are my favorite. That's my favorite application of it. Like the arena is obvious, like, but it's more just like clean up wigs and little period fixes. Paint outs to me are like so incredible because I feel like modern filmmakers, we have to go so fast on set. I don't care what your budget is. Like this whole thing from the past that we grew up hearing about of like block light, rehearse, shoot, like
what is that?
Dead. It's dead. And like we shoot Winning Time on film and they treat us like it's digital. It's just like, cool, actors are on set, let's get going, let's go. Just like shoot the first take, no rehearsal. And it's like, so we build the lighting into sets, everything's wireless, you're shooting as much 360 as possible. That's also just how I like things to look, but it's a workflow choice too.
Wow.
So I do feel like we have to go so fast that I'm like, oh yeah, there's a tube in the actor's glasses reflection. Like it's painted out.
Right,
like,
we'll get rid of it later.
It costs more for 200 people to sit here right now while we try to grip this off than to just move forward and paint it out if it even makes the edit. And same thing, like there was concerns over shooting the basketball stuff on 16 and concerns on shooting it on 8, which 8 I understand, like the level of resolution, but still ultimately they were doing comps on 8mm. And on the tube cameras, the Ikegami tube cameras, which would accidentally, we had this rule of like, don't show any green on those cameras, which is like an art. You're like following the game and you like zoom in so you avoid the green and you go back. But sometimes it gets in and they would comp stuff.
Yeah.
It's like 200 lines of resolution.
Yeah, but they can do it.
And it looks more real because they have a reference. And actually those low res comps look incredible. And I do not believe, because there are shots that we were 35 that we tried to make look like 8, and you can kind of do it. It takes like, you zoom in, you defocus, you add grain, you zoom in on the grain. Like there's a lot you can do to make it look like a smaller negative, but it never quite feels like the real thing. And that's the same thing for VFX.
Going back to what you mentioned about the acquisition format in those eras, I think it's so interesting what you said about, the luck can only get you so far and trying to give VFX the best reference possible. And I was reading about how you guys use the Komodo with the really heavy loaded in as sort of a light meter and as a viewfinder for maybe your scouts or just for while you're on set. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that technique and whether you've used that on past projects or this was the first time you kind of used like a little digital body as a light meter for film. And also what lensing you used on that. Like was it the Primo as well, or did that not matter so much, or how did you approach that?
That came about because our LUT for Winning Time and the print look plus our LUT, or the scan negative plus our LUT was so aggressive that know just normal digital photo camera that you're going to take stills to check your exposure or take stills to send to the colorist, the daily timer could get there enough. And I was very aware that HBO was going to be expecting dailies that look as good as digital shows. And that this whole thing of like from the past of like, oh, well, this is like, these are film dailies. It'll get graded later. That's gone. Like it has to, especially with a show that's taking so many visual risks. I didn't want to scare them. And I could not risk a scene looking way too grainy or way too underexposed or the wrong colors. It needed to look immaculate so that they would get excited about it, fall in love with it, and then move forward to the edit. You know, it's like get everyone on board for the risks. So that's the reason that we turned to the Komodo. I turned to the Komodo because it's tiny and I love that camera. I want to shoot a movie on that camera and it can take 3D LUTs. So we just shot tests with the film cameras and the Komodo, and then we did bracketing and then created a LUT that approximates as closely as possible to our film look and used it on set mostly in conjunction with my meter, but mostly to take stills for the dailies timer. And then at night we would take those essentially graded stills because it's, again, like it's a hybrid, at least the way my mind works. We're shooting film, but the workflow is a hybrid film digital workflow. Like I'm not using 85 and 81 EF filters. Like we're just timing the film extra cool or extra warm. So I was doing that in the Komodo and then showing that to the timer.
Perfect explanation.
No. Can I just take a moment? You need to put this in the episode. Cut out something that I said to put this in.
Yeah.
The creator looks so good. It looks like my favorite movie. And I am so excited that it's coming out, and I'm so excited for you. And it just the work is so high level, and the story looks incredible. And I just like if this comes out, and people who love movies don't go see it, then we deserve what we are getting in cinema right now. I am so blown away by it, and and also like I saw the Oppenheimer trailer, and I know the thing's shot mostly on the FX3, or at least like a nice amount of it shot on the FX3 Sony camera, and like. The digital noise when blown up, it's so beautiful and risky. And congratulations.
Thanks, Todd. That means a lot. Listen, it's funny because it's just everything that you were talking about in terms of like cinematographic philosophy, influences, like DPs that have inspired you, the philosophies that have inspired you in terms of like embracing imperfection and creating the scenarios in which like imperfection can occur and rawness and realness and all that. Like that was all what was guiding us on the creator the whole time. And so like that really spoke to me. And I hope it comes across in the movie. Like you guys will all be the judge when people see it.
It does. It looks loved. It looks loved the way when we were growing up, movies looked loved by their filmmakers who created them. And I think it's also, it looks personal. We were talking about this earlier. Like when I look at that trailer, I see Oren Blacks. We laugh about this a lot. Every time you come out with a project, I'll text you or Instagram you and be like, Oren Blacks.
The black levels?
Yeah, your black levels are very specific. And for me, they're very personal and very beautiful. And that's your way of seeing the world. Yeah. And I see them in that movie. And I think there's overlap between Oren Blacks and Fraser Blacks. And
very much so, because where did I get them from?
Totally, exactly. I mean, me too. You know, it's like all of us. And like, but I look at that and I'm like, there he is. Yeah. Like massive sci-fi blockbuster. There's Oren. Oh. That's the success.
Wow. Well, shucks. I can't wait for you to see it. I can't wait to talk about it more also. I mean, I'll be back on the podcast to talk about it as a guest, I guess, teaser for an upcoming as yet to be recorded episode, but we will be back. And there's so much to talk about on that movie. Like there's a lot of unorthodox thought that went into it and process. Yeah. But it's similar to what you were saying about Winning Time. And it's similar also to what you're saying about like just owning it. Yeah. And just like being confident in it. And it's not about asking permission or forgiveness. It's just, you just do what's right. Yeah. Todd, we can talk all day, especially about Winning Time. But there's one thing that we have to ask you, which is a clip that anybody listening to this podcast, if they've spent even 1 minute on Instagram, has probably seen your rollerblading camera operator whipping up and down the court, getting these like amazing dynamic shots on 16 mil. So can you talk a little bit about, we talked about the formats and we talked a little bit about the lighting and the design, but can you talk a little bit about the kinetic like camera movement and visual style of the show? And how you kind of came up with these ideas and how you work with your camera operators and just the sort of risk taking on that front of the visual style.
I guess in terms of the operation overall for the show, the idea was to create this sort of like Cassavetes Altman feeling where you are a fly on the wall and you're capturing these moments that are happening so quickly you might, we just got lucky enough to get that. So that comes down to like where we place the cameras, off eyeline, ultra low, long zooms, letting one shot become another shot. It's also in the workflow, like working with the operators where like it's a 3-camera show every scene. except for like specific moments where it's an A-cam only thing. But generally it's 235 cameras and then a C camera vintage, whatever that's going to be. It's going to be 16 millimeter. It's going to be VHS. It's going to be Ikegami. It's going to be 8 millimeter. Depends on the moment. It's going to be black and white. It's going to be some paintbrush flourish, which was always just a conversation. Some of it was planned. A lot of it is like conversations on the day. But you're trying to create scenarios, especially with like the handheld basketball stuff of like with a whole team talking, where like, how would we treat this in a documentary? Okay, the scene's just happening. So like, cool, A and B can start there, but then B's going to lose that character. So then A can ping pong and pick them up. And then C's like almost going to get seen. So he's got to stay super low. And I believe that those struggles are felt in the images. It feels like the cameras are trying and just getting it. And it takes a very specific operator to be excited by that process. My operators, I owe them everything. It's like Dominic Bartolone and Jess Cannon, Lakoff Cannon, and Justin Cameron, like my 3 operators, I think were excited about getting thrown into it and problem solving live. And that's what creates the energy. I mean, the basketball operator, John Like, that just came because we were testing everything, trying to figure out how to get the camera in the game and stay with the game and move around with them in 3D space, playing, keeping around like the fastest basketball in the history of basketball. And no tool could do it. You always want to get the camera really close to the object. That's the key, right? That's like you do horse racing. You want like a crane that gets the camera close. It's always about getting close. My key grip recommended that we look into this guy, John Like, who was like a extreme sports operator.
Yeah.
And he came in and he was the key.
So cool.
It's so satisfying to watch.
When I saw that, yes, that BTS, like Oren said, like literally comes up so frequently, but I remember seeing it and being like, no fucking way that's how they did that, because it just like makes so much sense, like the kinetic energy of the footage, but it also being on 16, it's like from someone on the outside, you just have to assume that it was done through some official HBO approved process. Then you see a dude just on rollerblades, like ripping down a court with a 16 camera. And you're like, it's so cool hearing you talk about how you had to sell all this stuff through and all the process of getting it approved and bringing that punk rock like mentality to the project. It shows so much in that one little BTS clip. It's like, wow, he actually managed to make this happen. Like it's super cool. It's yeah, brilliant stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, it's you're just doing what's right for the project, and that's always exciting to me. Like thinking outside the box, and like ultimately the best tool for that job was like a brilliant operator on rollerblades. That's it.
It's wild. You never think that, but then you do. So yeah, I think to close out, I would love to thank you so much for everything. This has been an incredible episode. I'm so excited for people to hear this. And I just wanted to close by asking if there's anything, obviously Winning Time Season 2 is coming out. You're directing episodes. It's brilliant. And I wanted to know if there's anything that you can share with the listeners on the horizon that you're excited about, or just anything in life or work that you want to share for us to look out for.
Yeah, I mean, whenever this industry figures out how to function again and take care of people in a proper way, and hopefully we get back to making stuff, I'm excited for, we're doing Adam McKay's new movie, which I love and I'm very excited for, called Average Height, Average Build. And I mean, there's a couple other things with directors that I just love and respect that I'm excited to come into the light. But right now I'm more excited to like find inspiration and joy and happiness in my life outside of film, it's a challenge because we're used to looking towards the industry to give us like inspiration and fire, and right now it's not coming, and it's sending us all these indications like we don't have value and all this stuff. And so I think it's gonna be up to, while we're actually fighting for that value, it's also just gonna be up to us internally to like find that value inside, because it's never gonna come from them. The unions will fight and we'll win some things, but in terms of like us feeling like we have value or inspiration, like it's not gonna come from them, nor should it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Todd. This was amazing.
Thank you, guys.
Woo! This episode of the Cinematography Salon podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Oren Soffer, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the salon community for sourcing topics for this episode. If you enjoyed listening to the episode, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.